to explain just how troubled our country, and by extension Africa and the rest of the world is. There's a paucity of leadership, and therefore alive to the reality that the whole world celebrates, commemorates the critical leadership role that the first president of South Africa played. We should pause and reflect and say, but who was Nelson Mandela? What would he expect of every South African? What would he expect of every African and any other person around the world who is a leader? Let me begin by saying each and every one of us is a leader, by the way. Leadership is never really positional. It is functional leadership that matters. And be careful about those who are prepared to do everything, even outside of the book, to ascend to a leadership position. It's never those they claim to seek to represent that they really seek to represent. It is their stomachs and their insatiable appetite for power and money that they seek to satisfy. So I would like to say a few things as briefly as a lawyer cum preacher could say, and allow for some question and answer engagement. For I believe that to resolve our country's key challenges, this moment, the eve of the birthday of Madiba, requires of each and every one of us to reflect on how we could contribute towards the eradication of corruption, all crime, unethical leadership, and poor governance in our country. Things have gone wrong, and we were watching. We were too concerned about our careers, our money-making opportunities, and possibilities to ascend to positions of leadership more than we were, if we were at all, about the plight of the suffering masses of South Africa, of Africa, and the rest of the developing world. So, based on the quotation, Nelson Mandela clearly requires and expects of each and every one of us to have a lifetime commitment to something. So the question is, since he had dedicated his life to a cause, what is it that you have dedicated your life to? I was touched one day. Reverend Matebula sent me a WhatsApp message, and that was at the time when he was or had been to Mozambique, when circumstances cried out for intervention after that cyclone. And I said, but where are other South Africans? Where am I? If we care as much as we often say when we have opportunities to speak, because we know people expect us to say it, where do we find the practical expression of that which we profess? So what are you committed to? He made reference to the struggle, his commitment or his dedication to the struggle of the African people. Until you grasp the fundamentals of the situation of the African people, you'll never really feel impelled to do anything about their plight. The kind of poverty that obtains in Africa is nauseating. If you are the leader that I believe we all ought to be, you ought to drop a tear from time to time when you reflect deeply and soberly upon the reality that in a continent as well endowed with minerals and natural resources, even fertile soil, as South Africa and Africa, multitudes go to bed on a hungry stomach. You simply have to look at the kind of so-called houses that many of them live in, the level of illiteracy, the exploitation and suffering that happens in South Africa and Africa. What are we doing about it? Where is the commitment? It ill behooves us to gather here today and in the years to come and talk about Nelson Mandela when there is nothing about Nelson Mandela to show in our individual lives, when most of us are actually hiding behind those who are doing something about what needs to be done. So, have you made it your business to soberly reflect on the plight of the African people that Nelson Mandela was talking about? Or have we lulled our consciences to that situation? Does it matter when you pass Kaelicha, Langa, Alexander, Deep Sloot, or any of these places? Does it touch you? Have you allowed it to prick your conscience that these are human beings and none of us ought to allow this to be normalized into what South Africans ought to resign themselves to? So what are we doing about it? If we are to gather like this next year, this time, here or elsewhere, what progress would each and every one of us be able to share as a contribution towards the realization of the aspirations so artfully crafted in the preamble to our Constitution? Have you fully embraced and internalized the fight against injustice, white or black domination? Or do you go along with whatever narrative is put out there in the furtherance of whatever sectional agenda might be there to make others look forever good and others look forever bad? Maybe I should pause there. Part of what we need to grapple with here is corruption. Part of what we have to grapple with in Africa and the rest of the world is corruption. But it looks like we have allowed ourselves to be channeled into believing that corruption can only be in the public sector. Believe you me, it takes two to tango. We will never be able to defeat corruption for as long as we allow ourselves to be choreographed into believing that corruption can only be in the public sector. Or let me be a bit crude about it so that we can really get a rude awakening, that it's a black thing. Every human being is capable of being corrupt. And believe you me, I believe we haven't even scratched the surface in relation to the magnitude of the corruption that obtains in the private sector. So, if we are to uproot corruption from South Africa and around the world, we have got to accept as a reality that there are masters of corruption everywhere, even in the Church of God. I mean, the shenanigans that we have seen ought to convince us that human infallibility dictates that you will find corruption anywhere. So we've got to move from the premise that we're going to make it our business, not by others at the expense of others, not to make others untouchable, not to allow anybody, including me, not to allow anybody to be rendered rendered. Why are always running away from me? To be awarded an undeserved saintly status. When you try to scratch the surface about this one, even if indications are there's something there, you will be bombarded with insults and so much negativity that a loud and clear message is sent out that you dare not touch this one. Check. I'm a very frank person, but there are things which when I say, like saying there's corruption in the private sector, which is true. Or there will be one article over the other. It will not deal with what I'm saying, but there will be one side kick after the other. What would Nelson Mandela do? Nelson Mandela would say, I'm even prepared to die for it. An injustice is an injustice regardless of who the perpetrator is. And we will get this country right if moving from this meeting, we are determined not to be told who is clean and who is dirty. We are going to research it ourselves, and when there is a smoke, we will follow it up to its logical conclusion. Let me just mention, by the way, what I'm talking about. I read a story from one of the Sunday papers this past Sunday. There was a human being who was projected as nothing but a drunk. I was left believing that this man is always on a high. Nothing positive can ever come out of the mouth of this one. He is a thoroughly discredited person. And I was left wondering, but why did they have to rely on the evidence of this person? That's the narrative that I was fed. Until on Monday, the man appeared on Channel 405. Man was sound. He said, but what was written about me is a lie. And articulated what happened. I'm not saying he was telling the truth. I'm just saying that he didn't strike me as a mad and crazy man who lives in a haze all the time. Sadly, some of the things that we read about other people, some of the things that some of our analysts would like to feed us with are designed to project some in a negative light and others always in a positive light. That is not how to build a nation. Nelson Mandela would never have survived if all South Africans flowed with a negative tide that ran against the cause that he was championing. And I believe that we would do well for the sake of posterity if we were really to take a deep breath